Hi, today we're going to talk about the Eightfold Path of the Yoga Sutras.
Or the Eight-Limb Path.
And it's 2.29 Sutra, so second chapter, 29. And Rob, you want to recite?
Sure. So the 29th Sutra is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, Ashtavangani, or yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, as the eight-limbed path.
Okay, within the 8 limbs, the first yamas has five yamas within it. Non-harming, or non-violence, the truthfulness, non-stealing, remembering, or sometimes it's considered non-sensual, or monogamy, and the last is non-possessiveness.
Those being your social ethics or your observances toward the outside world.
Yeah, and then the second are the niyamas, right? And that includes purity, contentment, sense training, self-study, and surrender.
And these are the, in some ways, the restraints or the observances toward yourself as the niyamas.
So let's go back to the yamas, and beginning with nonviolence. Now, nonviolence. Oftentimes, the yogi might consider nonviolence in regard to food. So the vegetarian diet that yogis take part in, and one of the reasons is, for example, nothing wants to die. So anything that you try to bring to death, it's going to fight. And within that struggle and not wanting to die, that fear is said to go into the meat. So, and then we actually, if you're partaking in meat, you're consuming that violence inside of you. And now, as far as nonviolence toward oneself, we can think of many. One being not getting enough sleep. That could be a subtle form of violence toward oneself.
Overworking.
Overworking, yeah, could be a form of nonviolence, or a form of violence. Not wearing your seatbelt could be a form of violence. What else?
Let me touch back up onto the food just a little bit. Also, in relation to how much life is involved with generating meat in an animal, you have to understand that animals are vegetarian themselves, but they're eating a lot of plants, or killing a lot of plants just to produce that pound of meat that you might eat in a steak or whatever it is. So you can consider it from just like the specific weights and balances of biomass that's taken in. So this is one of the other reasons that you become less violent by eating particular items, because a plant, it doesn't take a lot of resources to make, for instance, a lettuce. But it sure does take a heck of a lot of lettuce to make a pound of cow or beef or whatever it is. So that's just another consideration in relation to meat. More nonviolence, so other than the food process. Violence toward oneself is, as we said, overworking, or not being mindful of your actions to others. There's violence of speech, for instance, not speaking with kind words or kind intention, even even your intention, if it's really strong and it's a real negative intention toward maybe somebody else or other things, that's violence also. It just doesn't have to take place in waking life as an action. For instance, my hand, touching somebody. But if you intend violence, that's an example of violence also. That's violence to yourself. If you intend violence, that just makes a tiny imprint of violence in your mind stream. And so
I remember someone saying that violence could lead to disease, and if we have violent thoughts toward others, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's one way that it can poison ourselves. Just having those violent intentions towards someone, or the anger towards someone, could actually poison your own body.
Anger is violence, so it's said that one thought of anger can wipe out the meritorious or beneficial accumulations of eons from another point of view, Buddhist point of view actually. So,
and it's said that if we just practice nonviolence, some of the other yamas will fall into place. So, for example, truthfulness. If we're lying to someone, or if we're lying to ourselves, it's a form of violence. So, if you're practicing nonviolence, that would take care of itself, not lying and being truthful.
Because being truthful gets to the point without trying to bandy words. And now this is a really tricky point, because I've had people around me who don't have any restraint on what is truthful. So there's also the method of skillful means when you practice truthfulness.
Yeah, that's important.
It's not to say if you say truthfulness all the time just for laying something bare, no matter what the circumstances or who's around you, then you're practicing violence in a certain sense and just making more hurt around you. So it's important to practice truthfulness with some skill, and of course that requires skill and patience. Truthfulness also, there's required patience, because you don't want to, in the middle of a wedding gathering, saying, in a drunken state, well, remember 6 months ago, before you guys actually got engaged, when we went out and we partied and you did this, whatever it was. This is just a small example. But saying that during a wedding party, although it's the truth and that person did something 6 months ago who was your friend, you don't say that in the midst of a wedding party, your friend who's getting married to his new wife, right? That's, on one hand, but it's truthful, but on the other hand, it's violent also, because not only now are you implicating yourself and your friend, now everybody else is involved. That's going to clear the slate, and this can go on and on, but one has to practice some social ethic that has some skill to it, that doesn't try to be clever, but is appropriate.
Right. So non-stealing is the third yama, and non-stealing could, at first we can think of it as not taking what's not ours, and even material things, of course, but also thought. So you can have feelings of guilt that aren't particularly probably yours. Let's say, for example, you can take on someone's guilt, or take someone else's guilt and try to make it yourselves. And in doing that, it's not healthy or good. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. Somebody's knocking on the door. I know. And
Brahmacharya. The most obvious interpretation of brahmacharya is to not practice sexual misconduct, or to hold on to your vital essence, or your seed of Brahma, so to speak. your true self. Hold on to all aspects of your true self. And by holding on to this, you're remembering what your true self is, which is the Atman, or the fully realized self, is actually the essence of what you are. And that essence, if you're remembering that all the time, because you've held in, for instance, you're not practicing sexual misconduct, so you're not letting yourself be thrown all over the world with the winds of your desire and the winds of your
sexual energy.
Sexual energy. You're keeping that localized within yourself, so you can focus that energy toward perhaps a spiritual or a positive altruistic purpose to benefit others, as opposed to just benefiting yourself and your desire and perhaps the other person.
Yeah, I think desire is a key word there.
Yeah.
And in the Buddhist precepts, it's called sexual misconduct. So we can look at it from that perspective too, as Robert was saying. This is a very important aspect of the yamas, because sexual desire, for example, is the second most driving force in your body. So it has that much power. Sometimes it's running behind the software, let's say, in the subconscious, and it can direct our energies toward outcomes that we wouldn't necessarily want consciously, or it's running our desires subconsciously.
So it's important we remember that is really strong.
Yeah,
Part of our makeup. That's more in sync with kind of an animal or primordial animalistic sense that procreation. Sex is not bad. I mean, let's make that clear. Sex is not bad. Sex with your partner is definitely not bad. If you have somebody you love, if it's done with some feeling of benefiting also your partner. But it's also on a perhaps less evolved scale. It has to do with animalistic urges, the eating, just eating because you need to eat when you're hungry. Having sex because it's that time of year in the spring, perhaps, when you're supposed to mate so you have kids or offspring.
Or when the female's ovulating.
Or when the female's ovulating, those are very primordial parts of what we are, but because we are more evolved and moving toward a higher vibrational or higher frequency state that has more to do than just our base desires and our base needs, we can utilize these primordial energies, the desire or the sexual energy, and we can channel it into making our spiritual awakening and helping others even more stronger, because it is such a strong part of our makeup that if we focus it toward altruistic or benefiting others' ends, we can harness a lot of that energy as opposed to letting it dissipate toward this desire or that desire, etc. So in a sense, brahmacharya is about holding that Godhead. If we want to, we could say Godhead, we could say creative force, we could say divine force. All of these are within us. They're not something that's elsewhere.
Right.
You have to find elsewhere. It's within you. But if you focus that, you can accomplish a lot of positive action because of that.
And the last is possessiveness.
Or aparigraha.
And
non-possessiveness.
Non-possessiveness. So non-possessiveness is, in the yogic sense, not holding on. Again, not holding on what's not yours, or coveting, or
stinginess.
Stinginess. Yeah, stinginess
is a base part of that. Yeah.
Hoarding. Yeah.
I have a lot of books. I have to admit, I have a lot of books, but I hope to give them away, all of them, at some point.